tell my phone to be quiet.
Hey, Rabbi, do you know who the Hazan Ish is?
Yes. I mean, I don't know him personally, but I know of his work, yes.
Yeah, I just listened to a podcast. They spent a disproportionate amount of time on him. Is that because he really established the religious system in Israel?
The Chazon Ish is really considered to be one of the anchors of what created the contemporary Orthodox world. So historically, he's very important for the influence that he's had.
Right. And when you say Orthodox world, you mean Orthodox yeshiva?
Well, exactly. I mean, but the contemporary Orthodox world, because modern Orthodoxy is its own subcategory. The Orthodox world, as we know it in the 21st century and as much of the 20th century, is centered around the yeshiva revolution and reformation that happened under his auspices and in other places in the 19th century. So the yeshiva took an outsized influence in that period of time onward. So yes, it's a pretty big deal. And what he and other people like him did transformed Judaism in many ways.
Yeah, and Ben Gurion unintentionally attributed to that, right? Or contributed.
There was definitely, I think, some laws of unintended consequences with the preservation of the status quo at the establishment of Israel in 48, in order to bring the ultra-Orthodox on board with the new government. And what was supposed to be a minor concession has become a large political balagan.
Yeah, he should have saw that one coming.
Well, maybe he did, but he also knew, and I can't really argue with it, that in 1948, maybe he didn't want to fight that war with his own people when he still had so many wars to fight with the neighbors. And what's difficult is at what point do you say we need to have this discussion internally, even while you're having trouble with the neighbors? And Israel has pushed it down the road for 70 years. And eventually, and we're seeing it now with the current administration trying a little bit, it needs to be dealt with, or else it just becomes a bigger and bigger problem, which no one dares deal with, but which is very serious for the long-term viability of Israel as a Jewish democracy.
But I thought the original Zionists were secular.
They were.
If may add something, if you
yes, Natan, please.
You need to put in perspective, okay, in historical perspective, what's going on at the time, because what that rabbi did was to reproduce all the yeshivot and all the culture from Europe that was destroyed by the Nazis in Israel. And when I say that you need to put in perspective to understand the concept, first of all, Aaron is very simple to say, oh, he didn't foresee. That's not true. Okay, you need to put in perspective historical, not today, 73 years ago, but at the time. And you need to understand, one, people after the Holocaust, people thought that all that work of the yeshivot and Hasidim gone, disappeared, because all the most important centers and schools disappeared, were destroyed by the Nazis. Ironically, the leaders survived because they took them out and many to United States or to Israel, but all the students gone. So when it happened, when Ben Gurion said and deal with them, there was two reasons. One, okay, he thought that they are not more dangerous, and it's like a surviving species that you want to protect. And he thought, okay, you know what? They are only 20,000. That's it. All the work was destroyed 3 years ago from them. So let's allow them to reproduce. And that's why that rabbi is so important, because he brings, including the name of the same yeshiva from Poland and from Russia, the same name, the same dressing, everything. He wanted to say to everyone, you know what? Nothing, we survive and we continue. Nothing was interrupted.
Right.
But why Ben Gurion did it most important wasn't because to bring the Orthodox to the government, but was before that. When a panel from the United Nations came to Palestine in '47, before the vote on November about what to do with Palestine, and they asked everyone, the only way that the Jews could achieve, okay, the statehood is everyone in the Yishuv, that means the community living in Israel, they were in favor of the state of Israel to create a state. And the only way that I could bring the Ben Gurion to all those Haredim to support the creative state Israel is saying, you know what, we will pay you. And you need to understand for them also was a big compromise because for until 48, 50, including 67, many of those movements still today, a few ones, they think that they only can have an state of Israel when the Mashiach arrives. Mashiach didn't arrive, so we need to wait because they had a very bad experience with Sabbath TV and all these false messiahs that they thought, oh, we are here, everyone Italian, and then they converted to Islam or to Christianity, or they were killed, or by Korba and everyone. So they were very protective. So for the Haredi movement was also a compromise to say, you know what, we support you, most of them. There's one or two groups still today, they don't recognize the state of Israel until the Messiah will come. But for them, that was a compromise. And Ben Gurion needed them because without their vote, the United Nations couldn't vote in favor, maybe. Okay, so that was a nice political compromise, and no one thought they're dangerous there because it was a very homogenic socialist community living at the time, very secular. All the first aliyot were made all by secular Jews, and most of them socialist. And the Orthodox, the modern Orthodox, they were very ashamed with their identity, they feel very uncomfortable with identity. And the Haredim were very few. So when you put everything in perspective, you can understand why Ben Gurion foreseen, because no one foreseen that big number of people converting, okay, many tshuva, and the big number of Jews converted to the Haredim world and Orthodox happened in two ways. One in the '67 after the 6-day war, that they received all the territory that it was like, okay, that's Geulah, that's redemption, and especially for the modern Orthodox and for the secular, the big shock that moved them to the Orthodox camp and many of them to Jose Bechuba was the Yom Kippur War. Was so disappointed with the ideology of the secular government that was a big shock ideologically and religiously that moved many people, many waves of Israelis to become Haredim, and also allowed Menachem Begin 4 years after that also to win the party. So when you put everything in perspective, you can understand really why. Sorry for the interruption on the long.
No. It's a wonderful summary, and I would love to continue the conversation. I've gone into some of that detail before in my pathway class about the history of the modern state. But yes, it's very complicated. There's a lot of different aspects to it, but it is something that has been allowed to continue politically as a problem really for Israel at this point. Culturally, I don't think, culturally, very few people object to the Haredim having their decision. It's the political power, especially the status quo agreement with regards to allowing them to maintain authority and monopoly over personal status issues. These issues are ones that Israel is going to have to deal with in the long term. But we tonight have to deal with the short term of figuring out Keritot. So let's jump into our Mishnah for tonight. We are picking up at the end of chapter 4 and pushing on to chapter 5. I should point out that chapter 6 is the final chapter of Keritot. So if people have requests or recommendations for the next Masechet, I'm always interested to hear. So please feel free to let me know. So let's go ahead and jump in. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shimon Shazuri say, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua from our last Mishnah did not disagree with regard to a case involving a matter where his lack of knowledge involves items from one category. That is to say, he picked a grape from a vine on Shabbat and does not know which vine it was. As in that case, they both agree that he is liable, since he knows the nature of his sin. So remember, we had this disagreement between Eliezer and Yoshua about if somebody committed a sin, but they weren't sure they committed it, then whether or not they should bring the offering for the sin, bring the Asham Talui, or do nothing, depending upon different circumstances. Here, Shimon and Shimon Shazuri are trying to clarify that they actually do agree that if the person knows that they violated Shabbat in a particular way from one category of work, but they're not sure about the details of that violation, that you are still liable, and that you would bring the offering for the sin just as normal. So I know I picked grapes. I don't know if I picked it from the left vine or the right vine. I know I picked grapes, so that means I'm liable. And everybody agrees that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua both agree, yes, that is a normal liability issue and normal sacrifice. So where does the disagreement get highlighted? With regards to what case did they disagree? With regards to a case involving a matter where his lack of knowledge involves items from two categories. That is, he picked fruit from a tree on Shabbat and does not know whether it was from a vine or from a fig tree. So he knows he picked, but he's not sure exactly how he picked, and therefore the detail, the underlying point about it is an issue. And in that case, Rabbi Eliezer deems him liable to bring a sin offering, since he did certainly sin, and Rabbi Yoshua deems him exempt, as he does not know the nature of his sin. And this is something we touched on last week, where Rabbi Yoshua is very focused on the idea that in order to bring an offering, you have to actually know what you did wrong. If you don't know what you did wrong in detail, then how can you do tshuva in order to make the offering legitimate? Whereas Rabbi Eliezer is more comfortable with the idea that if you know you did something wrong of a broader definition, if you will, without the details at hand, you can still make the offering because you know you did something wrong. All right, so how's that working for everyone? Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda said, even if one intended to pick figs and he picked grapes, or he picked grapes and he intended to pick grapes and he picked figs, or to pick black figs and he picked white figs, or to pick white figs and he picked black figs, Rabbi Eliezer deems him liable to bring a sin offering, and Rabbi Yoshua deems him exempt, meaning that as long as his action did not match his intentionality, then if he is not sure of the issue, he does not bring an offering according to Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation of Rabbi Yoshua. Whereas for Rabbi Eliezer, of course, you would still bring an offering because you know you did something wrong, even if it's not what you were trying to do. And this is something we touched on in much more detail back in our discussions on Shabbat, that the intentionality, the kavanah of the action on Shabbat is of importance when deciding whether or not a person has transgressed or what type of transgression has occurred. Now, Rabbi Yehuda adds an additional pondering, although there are some who say this is actually Rabbi Shimon that's interjecting here. I wonder if Rabbi Yoshua deemed him exempt in that case, as even in his opinion, the person intended to perform a prohibited labor, right? If he was going to pick white figs and he picked black figs by mistake, he was still trying to violate Shabbat. So, or at least trying to do an action that is a violation of Shabbat. Not that he was trying to violate Shabbat per se, but he was trying to do something that would violate Shabbat. He wasn't rebelling, he was merely committing an accidental transgression. And so wouldn't that be good enough to say that you are sinning because you were trying to do something that would be considered a violation? the Mishnah asks as a way of rebutting, if it is so that he is not exempt according to Rabbi Yehuda, why is it stated if his sin wherein he has sinned, which according to their understanding, from which it is derived that one is liable only if the object of the sin was the one that was intended. The Mishnah answers, this serves to exclude one who acts unaware and does not intend to perform a prohibited action at all. So there's still this last bit of information, last bit of argument at the bottom, that whether or not the intention was really on the act is debated about whether or not it performs. For those of you that like to keep score, I will point out that Rabbi Yoshua wins this argument in the manner that Rabbi Yehuda interprets his opinion. All right, questions or comments on that?
So one is excluded if he act unawares.
Why does that phrase, why could the phrase...
means someone is, if you act unaware, you are excluded to bring any sin.
Yes, which everybody agrees with in general, that if a person is unaware of what they are doing, meaning they are acting without conscious thought at all. The classic example that was taught to me when I was first learning Shabbos Halacha would be somebody just sitting on the grass, talking with friends, and they don't notice that their fingers are playing in the grass and they're pulling up some of the grass pieces. Right? They're not even aware of what their hand is doing. It's just working on its own autopilot. And that would be acting in a completely unaware way. And in that circumstance, everybody agrees that you have not violated Deoraita, you have not violated the Torah, and thus you would not bring a sacrifice. You have still violated Shabbat according to Rabbanan, according to the rabbis, but you haven't violated it according to the Torah itself. For the Torah itself, there has to be an intentionality and an awareness of your action in order for it to be a Torah violation.
The same happens with the rabbinical or only the Torah?
I'm sorry, what?
The same with rabbinical or only the Torah?
No, the rabbi still holds you responsible that you need to do tshuva if you do something like that accidentally, but there's a much more generous exemptions if it's clearly done as a complete mistake, but one should still be on guard to prevent those things from happening. So this is an example of the fences, that even though the Torah says that if you do it by accident and with no intention, you don't have to bring a sacrifice, the rabbis say, but that doesn't mean you should do it. You should still be careful that you don't do it, even by accident and unaware.
So, but also what I mean is, that's the right about the Rabbanan. Also, if you have something Rabbanan, also the same idea. If someone do an unaware act that going against the rules of the rabbis, not the Torah.
Sorry. I thought, right. So you mean in general, not just about Shabbat?
Yeah, in general.
Okay, so with regards to other rules, the issue here is that with Shabbat, there's the specific discussion of kavanah and intentionality and awareness. In general, what you're describing is the issue of ignorance, ignorance of the halacha, of the law. And in general, yes, the rabbis would make allowances for ignorance up to a point of somebody who violated something de Rabbanan that was only prohibited by the rabbis. But they would still want you to correct your behavior when you became aware that indeed this is prohibited according to the Jewish rabbinic interpretation. But that's ignorance, not unawareness. This is unaware of what you are actually doing, not unaware that it's prohibited. If you knew what you were doing, if you knew that you were plucking the grass from plucking the blades of grass, then you would absolutely be responsible deoraita for the violation. It's not about whether you know it's against Shabbat or not to pluck grass. It's about, do you know what your hand is doing?
Rav, I had a question.
Yes.
So you're only liable for sacrifices if you violate the law that's dirotah, right? You cannot be liable for a sacrifice for a rabbinic violation, right?
Correct. You have to, in order to be liable for a sacrifice which is outlined in the Torah, you have to actually violate something that is in the Torah. Now, there are some, I hesitate to use the term gray area because it might be a little bit misleading, but there are some gray areas, some border cases where, like we've talked about, this Asham Talui, this additional sacrifice that's being brought as a maybe I've done something, where the rabbis are straddling a line, if you will, between something that is deoraita, which you may or may not be held liable for deoraita. And so the rabbis are saying you should bring a sacrifice that isn't the main Torah sacrifice, but is a preventative or a temporary sacrifice. And so that's where Keritot, which is because that's a running theme throughout this Masechet. That's where you get this very interesting additional conversation. But by and large, in most cases, yes, if you violate something that was clearly prohibited by the Torah, you bring a sacrifice. If you violated something that was prohibited only by the rabbis, then you would be flogged for that transgression under many circumstances. That wasn't the only punishment. That was the most common, though. All right. Now, this issue of did I or didn't I, of this doubt, is what's going to continue as being a big part of our conversation in chapter 5. And we're going to go back to that idea, that example of somebody eating something and they're not sure if what they did was a transgression. So, chapter 5, Mishnah 1. If one consumed an olive bulk of blood that's spurted during the slaughter of a domesticated animal, an undomesticated animal, or a bird, whether it is kosher or non-kosher species, or if one consumed blood that flowed after stabbing an animal or killing it in a manner other than by ritual slaughter, or blood that spurted after ripping the animal's windpipe or gullet, or blood that spurted during bloodletting with which the soul departs, one is liable to receive karet for eating this intentionally, or to bring a sin offering for consuming it unwittingly. All right, so it says in Leviticus 7:26 that you should not eat the blood of any animal, bird, or animal, and if you do, that you will be cut off, that there will be karet. And thus, we're in our realm of conversation. And so the issue is, what counts and what doesn't count? And as you can see, if you are eating the blood in all of these categories, whether you did it did it intentionally or unintentionally, you bring a sacrifice for that sin. All right, that's basic halakha. Don't eat blood. Jews don't eat blood. We don't eat blood of any kind. It's one of the reasons why the whole blood libel that began in the Middle Ages, or not began, but really took off in the Middle Ages, was such a where in the world do you get this idea about us? Because if you know anything about how Jews eat, you know that we get rid of the blood always. So that is sort of Jewish dietary rules 101. However, there's a few more details we have to talk about. But if with regard to the blood of the spleen, blood of the heart, blood of eggs, blood of grasshoppers, or blood exudate, this tamtzit, which is to say that oozes from the neck of an animal after the initial spurt of its slaughter, concludes, one is not liable for consuming it. That is to say, these types of blood are not considered to be blood. They are considered to be blood in a biological sense, but they are not considered to be blood in the official sense for which one would be liable for karet because of the what's the right word? The difference in how it is produced. That the blood of all of these is not considered to be the the blood of life that we normally consider to be the benchmark for the blood that is prohibited, because it says the life is in the blood. So for these ones, we are not considered liable. Again, they are still more or less prohibited, but there's a bit more details than that, meaning one should not intentionally gather the blood of the heart or blood of the spleen or the tamtzitz, this additional squeezy out blood. However, grasshopper blood and blood in the eggs are a little bit different. The blood of the kosher grasshoppers is not considered a problem. You don't have to perform shechita for a grasshopper. If you catch a grasshopper, you can eat it. You don't even have to kill it before you bite into it. Now, do I recommend this? No. I am an Ashkenazic Jew, and therefore the traditions I was raised with are no bugs of any kind, kosher or otherwise. But among those who do eat the grasshoppers that are kosher, technically the gathering of them is considered to be the same as slaughtering them, which is the same, by the way, for us Ashkenazic, that we might be more familiar as the blood of fish. You don't have to drain a fish of blood either. And technically, you could even eat a fish alive, having drawn it from the ocean or river. The blood of eggs is a little bit more complicated because that could be an indication of fertilization, or it could be a part of the menstruation process for the ovulation that led to the egg in the first place. So it gets a little more complicated if you keep chickens. If you don't keep chickens, but you're buying them from an egg farm, then generally speaking, the blood that is found within the eggs, if it comes from a farm where there are no roosters, that egg, those spots of blood are not a problem. Aaron, I see your hand.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, there's an Ashkenazi tradition about not eating bugs, because I remember a couple of years ago we talked about locusts.
Right. So there's an Ashkenazic, let me put it this way, reluctance to eat bloods, to eat the bugs. Again, there are only a very limited number. Most of the Ashkenazic officials had oral traditions about what was and wasn't kosher among the grasshopper families, but most Ashkenazic authorities did not engage in it. However, in the 20th century, with the reconnection of the Ashkenazic world to the Sephardic and especially the Mizrahic world, which still had those customs in more active practice, many Ashkenazim have taken part of eating these types of bugs and done so fine. If you can allow me to have another digression on this topic, because I find it quite fascinating, there's nothing wrong with an Ashkenazic person doing this. And in fact, there are some that are looking to mass produce the kosher form of these animals because their kosher production is so much easier than the kosher production of other protein, meaning of lambs or of goat or cows. And this might be a more environmentally friendly way to raise protein for mass consumption for the world and still have it be kosher. There are already many groups that are trying to do this for crickets. And there are some Jews that would like this to be done with the kosher varieties of these grasshoppers so that we be able to eat protein derived from this source without violating kashrut, of course. All right. Mishnah 2. Continuing to talk about our eating of something when we do or don't bring these additional offerings. The Mishnah resumes the discussion of the provisional guilt offering addressed in the previous chapter. Rabbi Akiva deems one liable to, that is to say from chapter 4. Rabbi Akiva deems one liable to bring a provisional guilt offering for a case where he is uncertain whether he is guilty of misuse of consecrated property, a transgression that renders one liable to bring a definite guilt offering. And as you can see, that's found in Leviticus 5. So the misuse of a consecrated property is called me'il. It means that something has been designated, let's say, for example, a cow, for a sacrifice, and you take that cow and you use it to plow your field. you are using property that is designated for the temple, and that is considered a misuse of consecrated property. When you do that, you have to bring a guilt offering. The rabbis deem him exempt, as one brings a provisional guilt offering only in a case of uncertainty as to whether he is liable to bring a sin offering, not a guilt offering. So here they are not offering, they are arguing. Thank you. If I can just get my mouth to match my words. They are arguing about whether or not the Asham Talui, this provisional guilt offering, is used in the case of sin offerings and guilt offerings, or whether it is to be used only in the case for sin offerings. And the rabbis are saying it is only for sin offerings, not for guilt offerings. And Rabbi Akiva concedes that one does not bring payment for his misuse until it becomes definitely known to him that he is guilty of misuse, as then he will bring a definite guilt offering with his payment. So Rabbi Akiva's position is to agree that that is true with regards to the payment, that it is only brought when it is definite, and then one brings a definite guilt offering in that case. Now, Rabbi Tarfon said, for what purpose then does that person bring two guilt offerings? That is to say, one that is the Asham Talui, and the other that is the regular Asham, the regular guilt offering. Rather, you can't bring two offerings for the same guilt. Can't bring two guilt offerings for the same thing. Rather, at the outset, one brings the payment for misuse of consecrated property, and its additional payment of 1/5 as mandated by Torah law, and he will then bring a guilt offering worth 2 selah and say, if it is certain that I misuse consecrated property, this payment for my misuse, and this for my definite guilt offering. And if it is uncertain whether I misuse consecrated property, the money is a contribution to the temple fund for the purchase of communal offerings, and the guilt offering is provisional, as from the same type of animal that one brings a guilt offering for a case where it is known to him that he is guilty of misuse, he likewise brings a guilt offering for a case where it is unknown to him. All right, so let's unpack Rabbi Tarfon's hedging of the bets, his insurance policy, if you will. Rabbi Tarfon is saying, look, in this particular case, we don't have to bring two different offerings, one provisionally and then one later. We can bring one offering, and we can lay a certain number of conditions upon the offering, depending upon what the eventual investigation might uncover. And since the misuse would normally have this additional offering that might go along with it, the guilt offering worth 2 selah, then I can bring that along with the money for the misuse, for the redemption of the misuse, plus the 1/5 portion, and everything can work out. If it turns out that indeed I misuse property, then everything falls into the category. I've paid what I need to pay for my misuse, and I've offered a sacrifice that needs to be offered. If it turns out I didn't misuse anything, then the extra money that I brought is just a contribution. Just put it in the bank. And if I did do so, and the sacrifice is not considered to be the sacrifice for misuse, but should just be considered a provisional sacrifice. And therefore, it's perfectly fine because, there was the doubt over this issue. Now, it's very logical. It's very nice and neat. However, the halacha follows the majority in the beginning, and rather than Rabbi Tarfon in this position. All right. Questions or comments on that?
The majority was, what was the majority?
The majority was the opinion before Rabbi Akiva, but this is going back to our chapter 4 discussion.
Okay.
So you'll have to flip back a few Mishnayot to continue the argument.
So the majority, if you summarize in one sentence, was that
That we don't bring the sacrifice for the we don't bring the sacrifice for the guilt offering, but only if you were liable. We don't bring the provisional sacrifice for a guilt offering, but only if you were liable for a sin offering, if you were found to have done it. All right, now we're not quite done with this Rabbi Tarfon position, as we're going to see, because Rabbi Akiva has an interesting twist on the calculation. So this is Mishnah 3. Rabbi Akiva says, the statement of Rabbi Tarfon appears correct in the case of minimal misuse. But in the case where he is confronted with a case of uncertainty with regard to misuse valued at 10,000 dinars, would it not be preferable for him that he will now bring a provisional guilt offering valued at 2 sela, and he will not bring payment now for uncertain misuse valued at 10,000 dinars, right? It's like, if you're only making a small misuse, then the numbers that Rabbi Tarfon was talking about, which correspond to the different sacrifices, works all right, because if there is a value, there is value there to cover the misuse. But if you made a major misuse, which would be an impressive thing to do, then that sounds like you're getting off cheap. This is like a great discount for what you would have to pay should you actually have committed a misuse. The Mishnah concludes, apparently, Rabbi Akiva concedes to Rabbi Tarfon in the case of minimal misuse, meaning he agrees that at the outset, one brings payment for misuse and its additional payment of 1/5, and conditionally brings a guilt offering. Apropos, the previous case in which one brings the same type of animal when liability is certain as when liability is uncertain, this Mishnah teaches, meaning this is a parallel situation then, with regards to a woman who brought a sin offering in a case of uncertainty whether she miscarried a fetus that would have rendered her liable to bring a sin offering, or whether she expelled what she expelled would not render her liable to bring an offering. And remember, we talked a little bit about that before, in which case the sin offering may not be eaten by the priests. The halacha is as follows. If before the nape of the neck of the bird was pinched, it became known to her that she certainly gave birth, miscarried, in a manner that obligates her to bring a sin offering, she should render the offering a definite offering as from the same type of animal that she brings a sin offering for a case where it is known to her that she miscarried. And she brings a sin offering for a case where it is unknown to her. So they're saying that indeed, according to this logic, the woman could change the status of the offering if it was clarified what actually had happened and what type of offering she needed to bring in that situation. All right, questions, comments? I know this is a lot of sacrificial talk. It's one of the reasons why I have hesitated to move into the different discussions of the korbanot until now, because I know that it's not easily relatable, and the terminology and ins and outs are hard to follow. But we're going to get into something that's a little bit more relevant, because we're getting back into eating, which I think is something that people relate to a little bit more in the modern world, although we still have sacrificial issues about it. So let's move on to chapter 4. Oh, come on, mouse. There we go. All right, so back to our provisional guilt offering. If one had a piece of non-sacred meat and a piece of sacrificial meat, this should sound vaguely familiar to what we discussed before, and he ate one of them and does not know which one of which one he ate, he is exempt from the obligation to bring a guilt offering for misuse of consecrated property. So we are applying a general rule that we talked about before, whereas if you have these two up and you know you ate one, but you're not sure which, then that means you might have eaten something that you shouldn't have. That would be misuse. You might not have eaten something that was a problem. That would be the regular piece of meat. Therefore, without any clarity, we don't bring a guilt offering. Rabbi Akiva, however, deems him liable to bring a provisional guilt offering in accordance with his opinion in the previous Mishnah, that one brings a provisional guilt offering even in a case of uncertainty with regard to misuse. If he ate the second piece, meaning he's now eaten two pieces, he brings a definite guilt offering, as it is certain that he ate the sacrificial meat, right? If you put before me two pieces of meat and say one of them is sacrificial meat that you shouldn't eat, and one of them is perfectly fine, and I eat one of them, then maybe I ate the wrong one, maybe I didn't. But if I eat them both, I don't know which one was which, but I do know they're both in my stomach now. And that means I have definitely committed a transgression, and I definitely have to bring the guilt offering. That should be fairly clear, I hope. However, we get into the more interesting case where things go unclear again. If one person ate the first piece of meat and another person came and ate the second piece of meat, dun, 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 right? So now we know the meat has been eaten. We just don't know who ate it, right? We know it's gone. There were two pieces there. One of them was okay. One of them wasn't. Two people each ate one piece. One of them definitely ate the wrong piece, but we don't know which one of them ate the wrong piece. According to this position, the first person brings a provisional guilt offering, and the second person brings a provisional guilt offering. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva, true to form, says that we bring a provisional guilt offering for this type of case, but he also thinks that each one of them needs to bring a provisional guilt offering because each one of them has the doubt of whether or not they ate something they shouldn't have. Rabbi Shimon says both of them bring one definite guilt offering as partners, and they stipulate that the one who ate the non-sacred meat grants his share of the animal to the one who ate the sacrificial meat, and the guilt offering is sacrificed on his behalf. So what Rabbi Shimon is imagining is the two guys will go to the temple and say, hey, we know one of us ate it. We don't know which one. Here is a guilt offering on behalf of us both. If I was the one who ate the normal meat, then my portion of the offering goes to him. If he was the one who ate the normal meat, then his portion goes to me. Therefore, technically, whoever is the guilty person actually owns the entirety of the sacrifice, and it's perfectly fine. Rabbi Yossi says, what? Two people do not bring one guilt offering, right? One may not sacrifice atonement offerings conditionally. You can't say, God knows who ate the real one, and therefore God will ascribe ownership of the animal to the actual guilty party. That's not the way it works. We can't just make a conditional statement. We can't show up at the temple and say, if I violated a law yesterday, then this is a sacrifice. We have to know. This is a topic that we've come up against a few times in the last few weeks. You need to know what you are sacrificing. And that means that you actually have to be clear. And if you can't be sure, then you can't do it. And that is Rabbi Yossi's position. That is the ultimate majority position, that we don't offer provisional guilt offerings. We already knew because the rabbis don't believe that it fits in this type of case. And that we don't bring these double sacrifices in any event, because the conditional reading is not something that we're comfortable with. Question?
So Rabbi Akiva also lost the first part.
Correct. Right. The idea of bringing provisional guilt offerings in at all is something that Rabbi Akiva believes, but the sages do not. And then Rabbi Akiva believes that you would bring two provisional guilt offerings, but the sages would say, no, you wouldn't. But they also wouldn't say you bring one definite guilt offering, because you can't go as partners with the condition on a sacrifice. So if two people clean the plate and we don't know who ate what, then in this particular case, because of the Me'il situation and the type of sacrifice that goes for that misuse, we wouldn't have a way to ascribe guilt to anyone. And so we wouldn't be able to bring the offering.
At all, no conditional neither.
Not conditionally, correct.
And that's the halacha, no sham talui or nothing?
Right. Well, they wouldn't have brought, the rabbis don't like the idea of an asham talui in this type of sacrifice anyway, because they only want an asham talui for when you have to bring a sin offering, not a guilt offering. And so that's something that they talked about earlier. So the difference between, those types of sacrifices is important for the sages. Rabbi Akiva is saying that even for a guilt offering, you would bring the asham talui. And the rabbis are saying still, no, it has to be a sin offering. It has to be a sin for which the punishment would, or for which the rectification would be a sin offering.
What's the difference between a sin offering and a guilt offering again?
One of those is a sham, and one of those is a chatat. And I don't remember all of the exact particulars of what type of animals were offered and exactly how it was handled for those two cases.
No, but I mean, what the act itself? On what's the difference between an act that would be a sin offering and an act that would be guilt?
There isn't a categorical difference, or rather, there are particular acts for which a sin offering is brought and a particular act for which guilt offerings are brought, and those are enumerated throughout halakha.
Right.
There isn't there's no bumper sticker solution for that.
But there's no is there any kind of reasoning what makes one act sin and what makes one act guilt?
What the Torah told us is really what we're doing. And actually this next Mishnah is going to bring those two side by side. And we'll see that there isn't a clear underpinning for why each are in their own categories. So, for example, Mishnah 5, if one had a piece of forbidden fat, which we've talked about before, and a piece of non-sacred meat, and he ate one of them and does not know which of them he ate, he brings a provisional sin offering, as perhaps he ate the forbidden fat. If he then ate the second piece, he brings a sin offering. As we know, a sin offering is the appropriate rectification for eating the forbidden fat, as it is certain that he ate the fat, right? So we know that if he ate both pieces, that one of them had to be the forbidden fat, therefore he has to bring it. If one person ate the first piece and another person came and ate the second piece, this person brings a provisional guilt offering, and that person brings a provisional guilt offering. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon says, both of them bring one sin. No, Rabbi Akiva says both of them bring one sin offering as partners, and they stipulate that the sin offering should be credited to the one who ate the fat, just like we talked about in the last Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi says two people do not bring one sin offering, again, for the same reasoning and logic as we looked at in Mishnah 5. So that means that they cannot double up on the bringing of the offering.
It's very interesting because you can see that the rabbis were teachers. If you don't understand, you have any lesson to learn, just not punish people for nothing. I think I see the logic behind Rabbi Yossi in that way.
Right. It's exactly. It's you can't punish for nothing, or for nothing that's clear,
or nothing that they can learn a lesson and grow as a Jewish individuals.
Right. I mean, we could try and make an argument that you could learn, not to eat from the same plate as someone else if you're not sure what you're eating. Okay. But the sacrifice is not about that lesson. The sacrifice is supposed to be, I ate what I shouldn't eat, and a particular type of thing that I shouldn't eat. So that is not being reinforced by this idea of being partners in a sacrifice. All right, Mishnah 6. If one had a piece of forbidden fat and a piece of sacrificial permitted fat, and he ate one of them and does not know which of them he ate, he brings a provisional guilt offering, as perhaps he ate the forbidden fat. If he ate the second piece, he brings a sin offering, as he certainly ate the fat, and a definite guilt offering for misuse of consecrated property. Sorry, just double checking here. Right. So the thing that I'm trying to just double check this translation, because I thought that sounded a bit weird, and I was just checking the Hebrew in my extra notepad. Right. So yeah, let me just clarify this translation, because it's missing an important element, and that's not going to make the answer clear unless you get it. So you've got a piece of the forbidden fat. That's the chalev that it's talking about up here in the Hebrew. And then you have a piece of sacrificial permitted fat. Now, what it means by this is that it is kodesh, but he is eating it when he shouldn't be eating it. And the word permitted there, I'm not 100% happy with, because it makes it sound like what he's doing is fine. It's not. This is still me'il. This is still misuse of consecrated property. And that's why we're getting this overlap of something that is a guilt offering and something that is a sin offering. So with that in mind, let me re-explain what we've got down here. I thought it felt funny when I was reading through it. And that phrase permitted fat is what threw me off, because it really sounds wrong in English. So somebody eats a piece of forbidden fat. Someone has a piece of forbidden fat, and they also have a piece of the fat we're not supposed to normally eat. However, this is from a sacrifice, and therefore it is consecrated, but he still should not be misusing it. And he ate one of them, but he doesn't know which one he ate. Then he brings the provisional guilt offering. Why? Because he might have eaten the fat. Remember, the sages say the provisional guilt offering is not there for misuse of sacrificial consecrated property, but because he might have eaten the forbidden fat, which is something that can be covered by the provisional guilt offering, then he brings it. However, in case 2, he ate the first piece and the second piece, then we know that he definitely ate the fat, so he brings a sin offering for that, and he definitely ate the sanctified property, and thus he has to bring a guilt offering for that. Everyone following the logic so far? If you eat the sanctified property, you bring a guilt offering. If you eat the forbidden fat, you bring a sin offering. He ate both, and even though we don't know which was which, we know he ate both. So they are in his stomach, therefore he needs to take care of this. However, and this should be expected now, if one person ate the first piece and another person came and ate the second piece, so we definitely know one person ate the forbidden fat, one person ate and a different person ate the consecrated property. How do we handle this? Well, this person brings a provisional guilt offering and that person brings a provisional guilt offering, meaning we ignore kind of the potential that somebody has made an act that would create the guilt offering for the consecrated property, and we focus on the fact that somebody definitely ate the fat, which would bring with it a sin offering, and which thus can trigger the Asham Talui, the provisional guilt offering. That means that each of them act as though they possibly ate the forbidden fat, and thus each of them bring a provisional guilt offering. Everyone following? Because the rest of it's going to sound really familiar, and I want to make sure we got this part down, because that's more of the first part is more of the difficult bit. Good. Rabbi Shimon says both of them bring a sin offering and a guilt offering as partners. All right. If it was one person who ate both pieces, they'd bring 2 offerings. 2 people ate 2 pieces. We bring 2 offerings. They just share them and make their stipulations that each offering should be credited to the one who's liable to bring it. Rabbi Yossi says 2 people do not bring 1 sin offering and 1 guilt offering. Same logic, same rules, and thus we are with that same ruling. All right. Does that make sense to people? All right. I'm not hearing any arguments. And I'm afraid I'm going to go ahead and finish here just a couple minutes early because I need dinner before a bar mitzvah tutoring that I'm doing. So we're going to pause here. We'll pick up with the last remaining Mishnayot in chapter 5. And I think that we have a very good chance of getting into chapter 6. Maybe we won't finish it next week. I doubt that. But we probably just have a couple more weeks with Keritot, and then we will be on to a new Masechet. Again, give me your suggestions or recommendations, and I will look into it. Otherwise, you're at the mercy of whatever I pick. Take care, everyone, and see you. Oh, yes. Go ahead.
Hey, just out of curiosity, is it possible to go over this using the USCJ version?
You mean to look at it next week with that translation?
Yeah, because it chunks it, so it's easier to absorb it in chunks versus going down in one big paragraph.
I like your use of the term chunk when we're talking about chunks of meat.
Oh, well, I got the term chunking actually from Moonwalking with Einstein, Joss Foyer, when he talks about how they memorize stuff. He calls it chunking. They put in a chunk to absorb it. That's where I got the idea from, actually. All
right, well, let's take a look and see if we can make that work for next week.
And it's actually kind of ironic, too, because Joss Foyer created Safaria.
So, yes, that's good timing all around. All right, everyone.